Welcome back, everyone. Today we've got 4 occupational therapy students.
I'm Darby.
I'm Angelique.
I'm Jack,
I'm Rani.
and we're here to talk about lived experiences and the barriers people with disability face every day.
So whether you're part of the disability community yourself, a family member, or just someone who cares about building fairer spaces, this conversation is for you.
So before we go any further, we'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians of the land where this podcast is being recorded. We pay our respects to elders both past and present, and we recognise that storytelling has always been a central part of the culture in this country. As we share our voices today, we honour the voices that carried the wisdom here for thousands of years.
There's a heartwarming story about Madeline and her family who turned their home into a sensory safe art space for their neurodiverse children to be themselves.
The article highlights how autistic people often face barriers in accessing different events due to overwhelming sensory environments and societal assumptions. The A-List Hub, an organisation led by the autistic community, is working with major venues to create sensory-friendly events by reducing lighting, sound, crowd sizes, and providing quiet spaces for this community to better participate in the arts.
I had no idea so many people were denied access to engage with music, arts, or even shopping because of how sensory overwhelming it can be. I want to share a little story from where I'm coming from. So I'm the eldest of 3, and my sister was with Down syndrome, and growing up with her shaped the way I think about access, participation, and disability. And at the same time, my understanding of disability was shaped by my Vietnamese Australian upbringing, and my mum, drawing on her, Confucian and Eastern values, put a lot of emphasis on resilience and not drawing attention to struggles. So visible disabilities like my sister's were treated as real and got medical support, but things like needing therapy or support for less obvious challenges were often brushed aside. And as an adult, I have to do a lot of unlearning and to kind of understand that disability doesn't have to be visible to be valid. At the same time, I acknowledge that I move through the world with a lot of privilege. I'm a cis heteronormative male, I'm young, able-bodied, university educated, well-travelled, and I live and work in the global north. Particularly I lean left, but I'm committed to equity and justice and holding the complexity of nuance, and all this shapes the lens that I bring into this podcast today.
That's really powerful, Jack. What you shared really sheds light into how our own experiences with disability shape our understanding of what it actually looks like. It often makes us forget about the ones that we can't see. Just circling back to the article, I want to point out that not every family can afford the time or the money or the resources to modify their homes to be able to participate in the arts.
For these families, creating supportive home environments is powerful and important, but public spaces still needs to still do better, and these homegrown solutions shouldn't replace systematic change, they should inspire it.
Yeah, exactly. And on that, the Disability Discrimination Act from 1992, while it was a milestone and it was intended to guarantee equal access to work, education and public spaces, policy intent doesn't always match lived reality, and laws on paper don't always translate to accessibility in practice.
Yeah, and accessibility often focuses on visible features like ramps and lifts, which are essential, but they don't tell the whole story. For someone with sensory sensitivities, a loud, overstimulated space can just be as inaccessible.
Exactly, and these invisible disabilities are often overlooked in policy and practice, and almost becoming the glass child of our society.
It all links to the ableist society that we live in.
Yeah, exactly. So ableism is the belief that able-bodied people are the norm or they're superior, and it shapes how people with disabilities experience the world through discrimination, barriers, and ingrained societal attitudes.
Yeah, I was actually raised to see the world through this ableist lens. So I'm a Sri Lankan-born, heterosexual and cisgendered individual living and working on beautiful Ngunnawal country. I was born into a very Catholic family, so my values, morals, beliefs are strongly influenced by my faith. I'm not neurodivergent, but I've been surrounded by neurodivergent friends, and I've recently discovered members of my family who are. I also worked in disability support, so I had the privilege to work with autistic people, which is why advocating for them is something I'm passionate about. I come from a fairly small family, being an only child, so my circle of influence and exposure was quite small in Sri Lanka. I grew up with parents who placed a strong emphasis on discipline, efficiency and conformity. And from an early age, I was taught there was only one right way to think and behave, which meant that there wasn't much space to recognise or value any neurodivergent perspectives. Like in my culture, someone who is autistic and struggles in loud or crowded environments might be seen as not resilient enough or not capable in the same way as others. And looking back, that really highlights how ableist ideas about what's normal were deeply ingrained in me growing up. My identity as a woman of colour and a migrant to Australia adds another layer as well. I often find myself switching between the cultural mindset I was raised with and the context I live and work in today. At the same time, I recognise the privileges I carry through my education, being heterosexual and neurotypical. All of this shapes the opportunities I receive compared to those who face marginalisation in these areas.
Thanks so much for sharing, Ange. It's really powerful to hear how your upbringing shaped your views, especially around shifting between cultures and navigating what neurodivergence looks like. Something that you shared about ableism really made me think about my own struggles. The internalised ideas of what's normal or acceptable, and it's taken me a lot of time to unlearn those assumptions. I'd like to share a little bit about my own experiences to give you guys some context. So I'm a white, cis, heterosexual woman, born and raised in Australia. So I recognise the certain amount of privilege that comes with that. But disability has always been a big part of my life. My grandma was a special needs educator, my great uncle has an intellectual disability, and my sister was diagnosed with cerebral palsy when we were young. These experiences shaped my early understanding of disability. But still, I didn't encounter autism meaningfully until I began working in the disability sector. And that work opened my eyes to how inaccessible our society actually is. This article also drove home how designing inclusively can make people feel safe, welcome, or able to be themselves. A quote from the article about sensory overwhelm also really hit home for me. It's like a tsunami. Imagine if you could never block out any sense and it was all coming down at you at once. I felt that tsunami before, but I didn't really have the words to describe it. So full disclosure, I was recently diagnosed with ADHD. Before that, my struggles were a personal failing. I masked a lot to seem normal, I internalised everything, but it all came to a head for me at a music festival. I was in a crowded, hot mosh pit, overwhelmed by the thumping bass, unable to distinguish any other sound. I was claustrophobic, overstimulated, and my internal monologue was brutal. Get a grip, you're being an idiot, all of that sort of stuff. So when I passed out and I woke back up, I told myself it was a burden, wondering why my friends could cope but I couldn't. And this mindset reflects neoliberalism, putting the burden on individuals to adapt and deal with it instead of making environments inclusive. I wasn't the issue, it was the lack of support and accessible spaces. The whole thing was designed without people like me in mind.
Thank you for sharing your experience, Darby. I agree, it wasn't your fault for being overwhelmed. The neoliberal view of placing responsibility on the person really highlights the individualistic nature of Western society. Australian culture tends to view independence, autonomy, self-reliance and freedom, often prioritising personal goals over community needs. I struggle to balance Australian individualism with my own collectivist background. I was born in Fiji and raised with Fijian Indian values rooted in collectivism, where we focus on our roles and how we're perceived at a community level. My instincts are to approach situations with collectivist attitudes, but these are filtered through Western individualistic influences from my education, friendships and my partner. Collectivism also encourages a focus on shared enjoyment and belonging, acting as a motivating factor for communities, ensuring everyone can access and participate in events or activities together. My personal life includes many examples of this, like when my aunt, who has limited mobility, is attending a family event. We all work together to arrange appropriate transport so she can still attend family gatherings with us. The mindset isn't ask for help, it's proactive. Show up, pitch in, and carry the load together. Whilst ableist attitudes do still exist in my personal collectivist community, like you mentioned, Ange, the strengths of collectivist values like shared responsibility, interdependence, and belonging could benefit neurodiverse communities to access activities and events with increased comfort and trust in society. In a country as culturally diverse as Australia, embracing collectivist values within an individualistic society could also create a more inclusive society overall. I also want to recognise my privilege as a heterosexual, cisgender, university-educated person, and that I identify as neurotypical. I work in the public mental health system and have neurodiverse close friends, motivating me to learn and advocate for accessibility within a naturally individualistic society.
That's a really great point, Rani. There's so much to learn from collectivist cultures and the role of community in fostering inclusion. Community support is vital for neurodiverse people to feel confident accessing spaces like arts music events. It's so important to draw on our own experiences and the cultural influences that we have to advocate for change. Conversation and advocacy help to shine a light on what needs to shift. My grandma was a passionate advocate for inclusion as a special needs educator. She supported my auntie Cherie, who has Menkes disease and intellectual disabilities, for decades. With no family support, Cherie spent her early years as a ward of the state until my grandma stepped in as her advocate and welcomed her into her family when Cherie was 5. Growing up, I heard a lot of stories from my grandma about her advocacy work and the shortcomings of the medical model's framing of disability. But that's a whole other topic that needs a podcast of its own, if I'm honest with you guys. But my grandma showed me that people shouldn't be defined by their impairments. Everyone deserves the same opportunities to participate in life. The real barriers are created by society: discriminatory attitudes, a lack of understanding, and limited accessibility. The social model of disability, however, shifts the focus from fixing the person to fixing the environment, challenging the ableist idea that able-bodied and neurotypical people are the norm.
Yeah, for sure. I think we should start looking at disability as something created by the environment and not the person. It's not just about removing barriers, it's about opening up spaces where people can actually connect and feel like they belong.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's huge because research shows that socializing is crucial for feeling a sense of belonging and inclusion, and in the self-determination theory says our basic psychological needs are relatedness, autonomy, and competence.
Socializing is one of the key ways we meet that need for relatedness because it creates belonging and connection.
For example, one of my closest friends is a huge movie lover and really values watching films together as a group, but he recently became vision impaired, and in our group everyone prefers sitting at the back of the cinema. But he doesn't complain, but he often whispers questions during the movie, especially during foreign films.
Yeah.
So when I can, I book seats to the front, and my other friends grumble, but from his smile I can see that he feels more included and has a better time there.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. I love the way that you were able to silently advocate for him. It's really special. But it kind of also taught me something. Even friends who try to be supportive can sometimes unintentionally create those barriers.
Yeah, I saw something like that play out in my own life as well. Growing up, my uncle was always described as like not normal. Family members would tell him he wasn't doing the right thing and that he needed to act more like everyone else. And as a child, I really internalized that. I noticed he became overwhelmed in crowds or preferred staying at home, and I assumed it was because he just didn't like being social. It wasn't until later that I learned that he was autistic and that his choices weren't about disinterest. They were about navigating a world that just wasn't built for him.
That assumption, that myth that autistic people don't want to socialise and participate is still everywhere. It's powerful because it shapes the environment that we create. Public spaces aren't designed to be sensory friendly, blocking autistic people from participating. So when they don't show up, society takes it as proof of the very assumption that it created. It's a cycle, excluding people before they even have the chance to take part.
Yeah, exactly. And that assumption really limits autistic people's access to spaces and events that often mean a lot to them. I know I was so excited to go to that festival with my friends, but after that experience I wasn't really sure if I could attend another one in a way that actually worked for me.
Yeah, it's definitely something we need to address. But it's really promising to hear that there's events that have started to adopt more relaxed performance structures or quiet hours for short periods during the week.
Yeah, it's really great that they've started to see the need for that, and some places are changing their approaches. But I do appreciate in the article how Madeline wants to see these changes and accommodations as like the standard practice, so that her family doesn't have to go to a certain time on a certain day to be able to experience the arts.
So as consumers and members of society, what can we do?
I think it's really important that we start supporting and using the current resources that promote accessibility and actively combat the legacy of ableist environments.
Thank you. Yeah, and by choosing to be allies and consciously supporting resources, businesses, and media that challenge ableism, we can signal to industry and institutions that accessibility does matter.
So that's all we have time for today. Scan our QR code for some resources and further education. Thanks everyone for really insightful discussions and sharings. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
thank you.
Thank you guys.
And thank you for
Thank you.
listening.